You're listening to Inside iOS Dev, a show about real-world iOS development, here with your host, Andrew Rohn.
And Alex Bush.
And today we have a special guest, Art. Cannot pronounce the last name. I don't want to try.
And there is no need for
that. Author of the best-selling book, React.js. You can find that if you Google it or find it at your local bookstore. Art, can you tell me more about yourself and introduce yourself more?
Yes. Oh, hey, everyone. My name is Art. And as Andrew mentioned, I wrote a book called React.js Essentials a couple of years ago. And I'm a senior front-end developer, a contractor in London. So I work with different companies, helping them to build front-end web applications.
The reason we kind of brought you on this podcast, you're a JavaScript developer, right? And I think our listeners by now know what I think about JavaScript. You and I, we kind of keep in touch. We run ideas by each other a lot. And recently you wrote this article, FDD, Fun-Driven Development. And it resonated with me a lot. And I think, Andrew, with you too.
Yeah.
So we wanted to talk about that. So could you give us a gist? What is fun-driven development, and what's the problem with that?
Sure. Fun-driven development, in my mind, is when you, as a software developer, approach a problem from the perspective of fun. So fun is the main motivation of your professional choice. So, for example, what kind of tool I need to choose for the problem I want to solve, and that's driven by how much fun I'm going to have using that tool. So that's very interesting to observe. I observed it in real life, and I saw the consequence when software developers are basically in charge of the tech stack, the tools that they use to solve business problems. And business have very little say in that. And so the consequence of that is when businesses will need to invest even more money later down the road to realize that the tech stack wasn't exactly the right for the problem they had, but they didn't know that in advance, so now they need to change that. And the responsibility doesn't come back to the software developers. Software developers are never responsible for the result at the end of the day. And so this fun-driven development idea is that we so got used to promote an idea where software development is fun, software development is supposed to be fun, and this is the main buy-in that businesses also promote. Go study software development, go get into software development industry. You're going to have fun. You're not really going to do the work, which is false, because if you talk to other engineers, for example, I have a friend who is a structural engineer. They do exams, like real exams, very often during the year. And,
engineers in other industries, you mean?
In other industries,
not software engineering.
Exactly. Yeah. For example, structural engineer. So structural engineers, they put real effort into studying. It's very serious business because it's not software engineering. It's building real, tangible, physical things. And so the approach is very different. Approach is much more responsible. There's much more responsibility. There's less thinking, if I'm gonna use this metal versus that metal in my structure for the building, how much fun I'm gonna have. Like, that's not even a conversation. While software development is almost like, I've heard there is this cool new library or there is this cool new framework, and I'm working on a greenfield project. I should try that. And so that conversation sounds a little bit strange to me.
Right. And then, ultimately, as you mentioned, right, those choices of the fun tools, they might not necessarily be the best choice for the problem, and down the road, something's going to break or it's going to bite you in the rear. But what I observed as well, software developers are not held responsible for that for some reason. Not as much as they should, at least.
Well, I guess there's a reason, right? Because software developers are in demand, and you don't want to scare software developer to change a job if you tell him he's doing a bad job.
Right.
It's kind of demotivating, and everybody wants you. So you have a software developer, he made a mistake. You think, okay, he learned now. So from now on, he's going to do better choices and make produce better results, and I better not tell him he's doing a bad job, otherwise he's going to leave. And that's expensive. So there's a real tricky situation for businesses to be in, but also gives us software developers this, free way to go and try things and play with things and be less responsible in terms of what business wants and more think about ourselves. What do we want?
Right. And, this is, at least to my knowledge, from what I read and heard, this is a startling contrast with what it used to be, where there were not that many in the very beginning of like software engineering, software development as a profession. There were not that many developers, but then there were not that many jobs, and most of the people who came to software development, they were sort of mature people coming from like older people, right? 35 plus, coming from different fields, say mathematicians or statisticians or something like that. And they were kind of approaching problems more responsibly, as far as I know, thinking it through, finding best practice, typically kind of justifying the choices they made. But then, that changed later when we got way more junior people in the industry.
Well, so actually, I guess you just made a claim there, Alex, that happened because of junior people in the industry. But I'm wondering, Art, what is your opinion on when this, I guess, phenomenon started happening of FDD, fund-driven development?
I think it always was in the field, at least as long as I was in the field. And I think I spent about 10 years altogether. And I look at myself, when I say software developers, I look in the mirror. And what I see in the mirror is the person who decided to do software development because it was fun. It was fun process. And the transition from doing it as a hobby to building things and switching to a professional career where you're getting paid to solve problems, that transition is very, very smooth, and you don't feel like there is a weight of responsibility comes with it. You're thinking, well, yesterday I was writing software in my bedroom for this fun project that I do. And on Monday, I'm starting at this company. I'm going to write software for them. So technically, nothing changes for me from my attitude. The only thing that changes is that I now have to commute every day. And so that when transition is such a smooth transition and you don't get extra exams, you don't get extra training or nothing else comes with it, well, you bring this attitude that I'm going to go do my job with the fun being the number one motivation.
Right. So I'm interested because, like, let's say you're a mechanical engineer, and let's say you have fun building whatever small structure is probably in your backyard or whatever growing up. Let's say you're into that, and then now you become a professional, and then you have to build these structures, whatever they may be, professionally. So what's different there, where they come in and say, "Hey, I do this for fun in my backyard." And then why don't they bring that same sense of, well, I'm just going to bring the fun, the FDD with me to my professional job as a mechanical engineer? What's the difference there and between there and us as software developers? Like, what do you think happens?
I don't honestly know. I think it would be a good idea to invite, a structural engineer or mechanical engineer and have that conversation with them and ask them, hi guys, how do you do that? But from what I've observed my friend doing as a structural engineer, the approach is very, very much, it's my job and there is an exam I need to pass and it's very professional. And there is a huge amount of responsibility that comes with it, right? So people feel like, oh, I'm not going to do fun, I'm doing serious job here. And I feel like as a software developer, at least speaking from my own experience, there is no pressure of responsibility on our software developer. There's a lot of pressure that goes on the middle management, but there is not a lot of pressure on software developer. And if you fail as a software developer, if you choose a framework, if you build a solution that doesn't scale, doesn't work, what's going to happen is the company is going to throw it away, rethink, say, oh, we had a great learning experience, and then they're going to propose a new solution. And so there is no consequence for you. You're not going to get fired. You're not going to get your salary cut. You're like, oh, okay, it was fun experiment. I like my job. I can play there.
Mm. So it sounds like from what I just heard, there's two pieces basically. The first one is you were saying, oh, there's a sense of personal responsibility. They take these exams. So there's a sense of professionalization and like standardization. Like I guess engineers and they'll have their engineer's ring and they have to take the exam, and it's a big deal when they get the ring, right? And that's like, they feel like they're part of this fraternity, and it's part of this big responsibility. And I'm sure they have their own code of ethics. And then the other piece was, it seems like there's no feedback from your employer on software engineers for bad practices. Whereas if you build a bad bridge, people will notice, right? And there will be some feedback. So does that sound like a fair characterization?
I think so. I think the fact that software development is such a thing. It's very hard to judge the quality of your work if you don't understand what's going on. When you see a bridge, you see a bridge. It's pretty clear when the bridge is built correctly. You cannot judge whether the software is built correctly or not if you don't understand how to build software. So, and there is nobody who would, whose job is solely to look at the architecture and judge it, or to look at the implementation and judge it. It's all within the team. And so if something goes wrong, the team is responsible, but mainly it's the manager who runs the team is responsible. So, but individual software developer who made a call or who made this choice, who did this and that, there is no personal responsibility.
I would say I would add even more to that. As you mentioned, there is no one to kind of assess the quality, right? No one to judge the quality. There is also, as far as I can tell, right, from my personal experience, there is no common standard of what's good and what's bad, right? Or at least like a set of principles or something by which to judge if something was, implemented correctly or in a good fashion or not. So that's also a disadvantage comparing to other fields.
And also to add on to that, Alex, I feel like the question of, is it even possible to come up with a metric? I think there's probably metrics where we can say code is bad. Like, for example, if you have a file that has 20,000 lines, a class that has 20, right. I think that's pretty obvious that that's likely bad, like likely not good. But it's probably harder to say, oh, is this architecture or this choice of framework the correct choice? I feel like that's also
that is true, yeah. It's the complexity of software, right? It's an art as much as a science. Yeah.
I guess one of the questions is, as a software developer, when you progress, when you get experience, when you learn, what is the motivation for you to learn? Right? So there is a motivation to learn a new tool. There's a motivation to learn a new framework because it sounds fun to learn. Everybody's talking about it. You went to the conference, you watched this podcast, listened to podcast, watched the video. So the fun is a very strong motivation to learn something new. Now, what about things that you need to learn that would be very, very beneficial for you as a professional that are not fun to learn? What's the motivation for you to learn those things? And apparently right now, I don't know what that motivation is. It's definitely not the money, because nobody says, well, if you go do the X exam, we're going to give you 10% more in salary. So money is not a motivation. Senior developer, how do you know you're a senior developer? It's not clear. There's no list of check marks that you need to check to make sure you're a senior developer. So there's no way for you to. There's no hierarchical structured system that tells you, okay, if you educate yourself to a certain degree, to a certain level, you get X and Y. Instead, everything's driven by fun. When everything's driven by fun, you just make your own choices and you skip the things that are not fun. And that's a problem, because then you just don't know you don't know.
Right. Yeah. So we've kind of talked about the outlining the problem and describing it, and maybe we can talk about, would you have any proposed solutions for this problem?
This is a really complicated topic. I think there's no one solution that can solve it. If I had to run my own organization and I had to make sure that software developers are responsible for the end result, I would start with, a checklist of things that they need to know. And those things are driven by fun, some of them, but most of them would be driven by, hey, this is the business needs that I have, that our business has. And if we fail at a certain point, if we fail to deliver to certain quality, we might not exist as an organization. So it's my job to say, okay, you join as a junior developer, and here's the roadmap for you, what you need to learn, and maybe that could be internal exam, for example. So a career, let's call it, a career roadmap for a developer that includes responsibility, and that's actually is driven by a teaching responsibility to a developer. And then frameworks, libraries, other new technologies come almost like, hey, this is a fun bit. One thing to just want to clarify, fun-driven development I'm not suggesting, guys, let's get rid of the fun entirely. Let's just make sure software development is boring, mundane, field. Let's all, be depressed and cry afterwards at home. No, that's not what I'm saying. I'm suggesting the fact that let's have a healthy balance between, this is a serious work that we need to do. Serious work requires personal responsibility, which requires serious education. And this education requires some planning. And this planning could be done within an organization by those who run organization. Or if I'm a consultant or a contractor, it's my own responsibility to educate myself and to provide a certain, insurance to my client that I actually know what I'm doing. And I'm going to do my best, and I'm going to make my best judgment based on what the client wants, not what will be fun for me to use.
So you mentioned I guess the organizations should define their own set of criteria for, I guess, quality of work of software developers, right? Do you think there is universal? Some of them are universal, like, I don't know, you gotta have you gotta know how to unit test or something like that, right? And can be applied to different organizations and teams, or it's specific every time?
I think both. There is definitely a universal set of criteria where, first of all, you need to understand that you don't know that your code works until you have evidence. So as a software developer, this idea might not sound fun to you. And writing code that tests your code might sound like a waste of time because you're not building nothing new, right? You're not adding visible, feasible features to your product and value to your customer. But if you try to understand the theory behind it, if you try to learn from the experience of people who've been in the industry for tens of years, why do they care about it? Maybe they know something. So that would be a good idea. So this is a general good idea. But then within organization, within the domain of the business that you're doing, you need to set your own set of criteria. And that could be, well, we're a healthcare company, and we're designing software or web products that is dealing with sensitive data for our customers. So what we're dealing with is not only the government policy that tells us, well, you're dealing with sensitive information, so you have to do this, this, and that. If you're dealing with credit card information, there is a regulation and policy of how you should store this information. I mean, we can extend that and say, well, if you're dealing with the health information, this is what you do. But also from within the business, say if the business says our roadmap is to scale to a certain point and provide certain services, which means we need to make very careful decisions based on what we know works. Maybe it's an old technology that is not sexy or fun to use at all, but we know it works and it's going to solve the problem the best way we know today. And so whenever somebody comes on board, A, we're going to provide, again, a plan for them to learn it. But B, also, we're going to examine them on whether they understand how to use it, but also why to use it, right? Like, what is it we're trying to achieve? So I think it's the general field checklist that we need to be aware of and educate ourselves because nobody else will. And then when you come to organization, you need to have a roadmap or some kind of a training system for junior developers so that they would be aware what is expected of them and that they actually going to bear responsibility. That's a good. I think that's a good balanced system.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
I also feel like it's part of the culture of software engineering in general, and I think in part it's because, well, I feel like there's many pieces, but a couple I can think of right now is one, the average age of the developer is pretty young, and most people don't stay programming for, people program for 5, 10, 15, 20 years, and then they either do something else or go into management, and then so that's one piece. There's a lot of young, inexperienced people, and then the second one is, to me, there's a lack of I don't know, respect for the elders is like not. It sounds like higher than I'm kind of thinking, but in a sense, like respect for like people who have worked in the industry, who have written books, and who have given guidelines on what good code is and how you should approach problems. I just see, like, I read a lot of books and I listen to a lot of experienced engineers, and I see like a lack of that in people of my peers, right? And so I think that's why there's a lot of reinventing of the wheel, because it is fun to solve some problem. I think that's part of the human, there's a release of dopamine or something, I'm sure, when you're solving these problems, because it's like, we're humans, we innately want to, solve problems, and I think it's like solving a puzzle in a way. Mm-hmm. So there's a sense of gratitude, and like you said, fun, right? So I think it's like I think one potential thing is just having, if we could have more in the community, more of a sense of like duty and ethics that we follow, and sense of like respect for your elders in a way, we would have less of this fun-driven development, as you say.
And I personally would add that I wish, at least maybe in certain technologies, with regards to certain technologies, there was a list of, I don't know, 3 to 5 books, must-read books, before you kind of, make any kind of decision on picking a new technology there, right? So that everybody's on the same page and everyone knows the common set of terms and values, if you will.
Well, actually, it's interesting. There's 3 software developers right now in the room. Let's do a quick questionnaire, guys. What would motivate you to educate yourself on a topic that you think is boring, but I will tell you need to know? So what would be the right motivation for me to give you, so you would go and educate on yourself on the topic that is boring to you?
I can go first. For me, it's pretty easy. If that topic makes me more, I guess, if it will make me more aware of a bigger picture of software development, and if it will give me a guidance on how to build more professional software, more correct software, I will read it, even if it's boring.
I think for me, I'm big on continual learning in everything and anything. I read all kinds of topics. And so for me, if it can be framed in a way that there's useful information that I can glean from this, then I can apply to other parts of my life. I mean, I love reading philosophy, history, things like that. And I feel like they might not apply directly to some problem I'm trying to solve in my everyday life, but there's always a lesson in there that I think translates in some sense if you really kind of pick it apart and think about it. So if there's a boring topic, quote unquote, I think if there was a way to frame it where there's these deeper lessons that I can take with me in the long run that will benefit me, I think that would help motivate me. But I mean, there are just some things that are just boring, and you just kind of have to remind yourself to keep moving forward. One thing that's boring for me that I'm working on is analytics. I don't find it exactly glamorous, but it's something that's done in businesses. And so for me, I try to, like I said earlier, reframe it where like I try to say like, okay, well, what can I learn from doing this work? So that's kind of personally how I would say.
That's interesting. I thought about this and I thought that, well, the core, again, if I would be running an organization that builds software, the core of the problem potentially comes from the very first stage when software developers are being recruited. So one is there should be no false advertising that you come to the organization to have fun. That's not true. You come to organization to solve serious business problems. And fun can be part of it, good for you, but that's not why you're here. And the second part is, I would understand as an HR, as a recruiter, I would try to understand what is the motivation that this junior software developer is driven by. So is the fun really at the core of his or her motivation? And if it is, then you need to think whether they're a good fit or not. And if you say, well, what you just told me, well, I like to learn. Okay, so if that's one of your huge motivation that drives you every day, and I will try to set up the environment in a way where you get a chance to learn, but some of the things will be not popular, quote unquote boring, but you get the learning experience. There's always progress for you. So as an HR, as a recruiter, it's not only, hey, I know JavaScript, I know React, I know Redux, I know all those things. Okay, cool, that matches my spec. That's not where it ends. I think the core thing is, what are you driven by? What do you want? What are you motivated by? And some say, well, I care about money. I'm a consultant. Money is the reason why I'm a consultant. So let's say, okay, cool. So you're gonna work on this thing that is boring for most software developers. It's an old technology, but we pay extra if you do that. Great, that could be a great motivation. So I think this is as an entry point to the organization, you should be aware of what to expect, and then I think the whole thing's gonna be healthier.
That's actually a really good point. Now I think about it, I guess I'm that type of developer. I would never join an organization because the job post said it's going to be fun. I don't really care about that, right? Like, to me, I'll have my fun when I'm architecting things and solving a problem, right? In a professional manner, at least to my knowledge, right? Like.
Actually, yeah, that's interesting. I also am leery of these job postings where even like the Googles and the Facebooks of the world, I see like the infantilization of adults, essentially. Like, right. You see these advertisements for recruiting for Google, and like they have like, oh, we have a slide and we have a ball pit. And I've always found that strange. Like, I'm an adult. How about give me good insurance, give me good pay, treat me with respect, give me a work that's meaningful, give me work that I feel like I can learn from and grow as an individual. So I've always found that strange, and I don't think any of us are the kinds to be drawn in by that kind of advertising, given we're having this conversation. But apparently that's advertising is working, right? Because companies like Google and Facebook are putting out that kind of, but I guess maybe that's to draw in those junior developers fresh out of university who want to continue their lives of just hanging out with their friends and having fun and hacking away. And again, maybe that goes back to the point of just engineers in general being young, and so there's just a lack of maturity.
That also comes back to the point that there's a supply and demand problem. That as a Google, you cannot choose. You can say, well, you have amazing experience and amazing skills, but you're driven by the wrong things, so we're not going to hire you. Like, that's not even a conversation.
You see, I get that, and I have not precisely a counter argument, but maybe a counter thought idea to it, which I don't really have a way to prove or disprove. But I always think, roughly speaking, a professional senior developer who's not driven by fun, but rather by, professionalism, if you will be worth and produce way more results than, say, 10 junior developers driven by fun. Assuming that those 10 junior developers basically make a lot of mistakes, roughly speaking, that blow up down the road. and that one professional will not, even though they might go at a slower pace at first. Essentially, the idea being software development, it's a constantly evolving, changing thing, and it's a marathon, not a sprint. But yeah, again, I cannot really test and prove that or disprove.
I think one interesting observation I had is that when I was creating my CVs and getting into software development as a job, I've been told this advice that never mentioned that money is the most important thing to you, that money is the prime motivation to you. And I was always wondering, well, why not? That's the truth. Money is the key motivation because you need to pay your bills and you have certain things that you want to have certain things that cost money, like even good education costs money. And on the other hand, saying that you want this job because it sounds exciting to you and fun to you, like, okay, but how's it a good thing? So to me, I always had this disconnect with the suggestions, advices that I got, and I think finally it's got aggregated into this fun-driven development idea, which, by the way, a very interesting point. On the other hand of it, you have pain-driven development, which we could discuss next time.
All right, guys, that was it. Thanks for listening. You can tweet at us at Inside iOS Dev on Twitter.
Check out Art's fun-driven development guide. You can read his blog post about this.
And yeah, Art, do you have anything? Any closing words?
I guess my closing words would be, guys, if you write software today, it's in your best interests to go right now on Amazon or just Google and search for recommended top 10 books that every software developer should read, regardless of domain and industry. Just take a note, pick one or two, even order one on Amazon, and then start digging, start reading, start looking for something that you don't know.
Love it. I think that's great advice.
Yep. All right, guys. See you next time.
Take care. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.